and welcome to Out of the Fog. I'm Lynn Hammond. Tonight, my guests are Catharyn Andersen, Vice President Indigenous of Memorial University, Newfoundland and Labrador. As well, I'm joined by Valeri Pilgrim, who is the manager of the Indigenous Student Resource Center. Join us after these messages.
You're watching Rogers TV St. John's.
The fate of the family is gonna come down to you.
I can't do this.
Let me help you. The rats told me everything. Don't eat those.
Even in our darkest moments, there's light where you least expect it.
You're watching Rogers TV St. John's.
We're back with Catharyn Andersen. Catharyn, I am so glad to finally meet you. As I said today, you know, I've heard your name so often in recent years, and it's a pleasure to have you with us on Out of the Fog.
Thank you, Lynn. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so, you know, you have been appointed to a very important role with Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, the first Vice President Indigenous. So, you know, perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, how you came to this role.
Well, I'm Catharyn Andersen from Nunat-Sivumyuk from Labrador. I've been working with Memorial now for almost 7 years. I started as Special Advisor to the President on Indigenous Affairs. And over the course of the last 6-7 years, we've been working towards developing a strategic framework for indigenization. And since July of last year, I've been appointed to this new role, as you said, Vice President Indigenous. It's the first Vice President Indigenous position with Memorial, and only the second in the country, actually.
Incredible.
At a post-secondary institution. So it's really exciting to have this position at the Vice President's table, working with other senior leaders. We have an incredible team led by Dr. Vianne Timmins as President, and she's, from day one, she's been incredibly supportive of the work we're doing around indigenization.
Excellent. So let's talk about terms, because of course, you know, as we discussed, you know, some people in the general public might not really understand some of the language.
Yeah.
So indigenization, what does that mean?
Well, I think, and it's a great question, because I think some of these terms are still quite new. So there's a lot of people who don't really understand what they mean, but indigenization is really about bringing in and integrating Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. So for years and centuries, Indigenous peoples have had their own knowledge systems, their own understandings and knowledges of their environment, of their cultures, and universities have been built on really Eurocentric perspectives and knowledge systems.
Research about Indigenous people, not research with Indigenous people, not that cohesive learning.
Exactly, exactly. And so what we're trying to do is to bring that into the university and to recognize and value Indigenous knowledges as commensurate, as equal to Eurocentric knowledge.
And so colonialization. So, you know, we know that, you know, Memorial University, you know, created by, you know, governments at the time, you know, very much colonist governments.
Yep.
So how does that word, how does the decolonization of the university, you know, what does that really mean?
So decolonization is something that's really important and needs to happen alongside indigenization. So colonization is about, you know, Europeans, whether British, French, whoever, coming to these lands and setting roots here and when you think about and understand, for example, the doctrine of discovery and what that means, and how these rules and laws that came from Europe were brought here and applied here with no regard for Indigenous peoples here and the Indigenous peoples that have been here since time immemorial. So decolonization is about kind of taking away some of those colonial structures and understanding how those colonial structures have impacted Indigenous peoples and have impacted the systems and structures that we work in and live in today.
Can you give us perhaps an example of a system or structure within the university that needed to evolve, that needed to change, just to help people understand, the type of work?
So if we think about academic programs at the university, so if you register for a course in history, let's say, and you have a course, the course is about the history of the Americas. Very often, that history begins with the colonizers, with the discovery.
That kind of language,
yeah,
right.
So oftentimes it's about understanding the stories that we tell, the narratives that are created. Another example is the terms of union. When Newfoundland joined Confederation in 1949, the terms of union stated that there were no natives in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we know that's not true. So this decolonization is about really coming to terms with more truth-telling and understanding the real history. But like I said, it's also about structures as well, and how those structures privilege certain people. And Indigenous people have, for many years, been marginalized. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was established as part of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement to look at the truth, the history, the legacy of residential schools in this country, we've seen through that the impact of those kinds of policies, what the impact they've had on Indigenous peoples and communities and cultures and languages. And so that's some of the things that we're trying to work with and repair.
And so how does the university system, the work that you're undertaking, relate to the calls of action? Is Memorial, I know they are, but how is Memorial recognizing the calls to action and implementing some of these important actions?
So last year, the university approved the strategic framework for indigenization, which I referenced earlier.
Yes.
And our very first recommendation in there is that the university supports the TRC calls to action. And there are a number of them that relate and speak specifically to universities and what universities can do. So a lot of them are about medical schools, social work programs, nursing, but also creating university degrees and courses in Indigenous languages. So we're working with units, academic units across the university to see how we can put some of those calls to action into place. And we've been having conversations about Indigenous languages, for example, and how we can teach Indigenous languages at Memorial. It's something we've been doing for decades, actually, but not consistently. And I think that's something we would like to see in terms of a more consistent delivery.
And so, when you look at career paths, for example, take social workers, I think that, there's absolute recognition of the importance of Indigenous peoples being social workers themselves, people who recognize and understand cultures and can relate at that level. So are you seeing a keen interest now at social work or in other faculties where Indigenous peoples from Newfoundland and Labrador are really starting to seek out some of those, like social work that will really have those meaningful long-term impacts on communities.
We are, and I think for years the university has been working with Indigenous communities themselves actually to develop cohort programs delivered in Labrador.
Right.
So we've had a cohort with the Nunavut government for a Bachelor of Social Work, for a Bachelor of Education, for a Bachelor of Nursing.
Yeah.
And we've also had designated seats in a lot of these programs across the university for Indigenous students. And I think that's really critical to recognize that we have a responsibility to support Indigenous communities and their hopes and their dreams and, in moving some of these pieces forward and having their own people in these programs. And for a long time, universities have looked at indigenization as how we support Indigenous students. But I think something that's also really important is that we need to do work for non-Indigenous students so that they can understand the history of Indigenous peoples, of colonization, and I think that also supports truth and reconciliation.
Well, and I think for me, as someone who lives in this province who is not Indigenous, some of my greatest experiences and learning have been through, sharing meals, through listening, through, those opportunities. But people are also perhaps sometimes afraid to offend, afraid to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And so it's that kind of place of comfort where, it's where people can, genuinely, seek those opportunities. I think, your role and the conversations that are happening at the university are really opening that up.
I think so, and and that is really, really important. It just makes me think of a guest speaker we had at Memorial University a few years ago, Dr. Shawneen Pete, and she talked about we have all been structurally denied the opportunity to learn about Indigenous peoples because we don't learn, it's not in the curriculum in K-12. I know that the Department of Education is working on that, but we have a long way to go. And I think the university definitely has a role to play there.
Well, thank you so much, Catharyn. I know that, this is a genuine personal interest of mine. I'm so pleased that Dr. Timmins and the university have recognized the importance of indigenization at Memorial. I look forward to opportunities to share information with the public. And, certainly here at Out of the Fog, we genuinely appreciate the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're welcome. We'll be back after these messages.
It all started when I racked up some serious debt. Interest payments were going up, creditors were calling. Janes and Noseworthy came up with a plan. Knowing that the phone was going to stop ringing and that I was not in this alone was a huge relief. Bankruptcy or a consumer proposal or whatever help you get is not the end. It's just the beginning. A chance to start again with knowledge and support and people in your corner. Are you ready? Get out of debt. It's okay.
Learn more about Leah's story at janesnoseworthy.ca.
Eddie fell. Whoa, I'm not driving. I'm way too stoned. How are you feeling, beer?
Oh, since we had that talk, I'm not driving tonight at all.
What about you, Dave?
You only had a couple of drinks.
And only a couple of puffs.
I don't drink and drive. No way I'm getting behind the wheel when I smoked weed, too.
How are we getting home, then?
Oh, you can drive, Dave.
Come on, Dave.
Take one for the team, buddy.
Don't let weed and alcohol influence your decision to drive.
Yeah, I need a ride.
We're back with Valeri Pilgrim, manager of the Indigenous Student Resource Center at Memorial University. So glad to have you with us today, Valeri.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yep.
So, the Indigenous Student Resource Center it's housed in Juniper House. Is that correct? So, something that's unique to Memorial University. But let's perhaps talk about what brought you to this role.
First of all, I'll tell you that I grew up in Maine, Nunavut, in northern Labrador. I actually came into the manager's role in 2018. However, I've had other roles at the university, including being with the Native Liaison Office, later the Aboriginal Resource Office, and now the Indigenous Student Resource Centre going back to 2011. So I've had some history there at the university with regard to Indigenous students. And yes.
And so, you know, we've recognized, we also had Catharyn Andersen on the show today, and certainly there's a recognition at the university of the importance of indigenization, you know, the importance of making sure that, you know, there are opportunities for Indigenous students and that they have the resources that they need in order to be successful. I was very interested to learn how many Indigenous students are attending programs throughout the Memorial University systems. Can you share that with us?
Well, enrollment numbers vary right across the campuses, Grenfell, St. John's, Goose Bay, Subarctic Arctic Studies in Goose Bay. We have anywhere from 1,100 to 1,300 in all those campuses enrolled. However, programming numbers are lower, but we do have, it's important to have culturally, cultural programming for students so that they can feel at home and welcomed in a space where they see themselves, where they belong.
And so, of course, you know, particularly, let's say, you know, in the St. John's region, students coming from Labrador or other parts of the province, you know, St. John's in itself can be a huge adjustment. And so, a part of what you do is ensure that the programs and services and opportunities are there so that students can have those cultural connections and to also engage with other Indigenous students.
Yes, that's perfectly correct. And Indigenous student success is very important to the success of Indigenous students and their education. So the Indigenous Student Resource Centre offers cultural, social programming, a welcoming space, a safe space where students can gather and come together to learn from each other and also to feel at home. I often say Juniper House, where the ISRC is housed, is a home away from home. And the two staff, myself and the Indigenous Student Success Coordinator, want to ensure that students feel at home and welcomed and safe, and that they can thrive in the university environment with the help of our supports and services.
And Juniper House itself and the program, of course, was developed for and by Indigenous peoples with their input. You know, one of the things that I saw was a tour of elders, for example, who had an opportunity to tour the house and, you know, to provide input and, you know, to see. And I guess that also helps them to refer within their own communities, to, you know, tell their young people or people pursuing post-secondary education that this is a space for them.
And it's also about listening to what our communities want as well. So this space is an inclusive space that I often say it's as beautiful as it is because we had input from not just Memorial University and student staff and staff, but from the Indigenous communities. Our elders, our knowledge holders came to visit before and during the renovation process. So a lot of care and conversations have gone into creating a space that we feel students, Indigenous students, will feel very welcomed because they can now reflect in a space that they feel they belong.
And so how do you make the connections with those students? I mean, you know, as an individual who applies to Memorial University, makes the plans to, you know, perhaps move into St. John's, how are those connections made with Indigenous students who come to St. John's?
So normally we send a welcome email to new Indigenous students who come to Memorial every semester, and we let them know that the Indigenous Student Resource Centre is here on campus and that we're here to assist with navigation, cultural programming, check out our space and our activities we have a Facebook page, and we also have an email listserv where we send out like a monthly calendar of events so that students know what we're doing.
And so they self-identify then in the application process?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And so are there perhaps elders who come in and spend time with students? Perhaps there are elders or knowledge holders who live in the city. Do they participate at Juniper House?
So we did have a pilot project that we ran with the School of Social Work from 2018, I believe, until about 2019 to 2021. The pandemic sort of slowed that process, or halted it for a little bit. So visiting elders and knowledge keepers came to our space when we were at the University Center at the time, and we just had one small space there, which was often filled. But in the strategic framework for indigenization, that is something we are looking at, that we hope to build an elders or knowledge holders visitor program down the road, if we can do that. That is, conversations are happening, and that is a part of the strategic plan.
Yeah. And so, something, and I actually also discussed this with Catharyn, for non-Indigenous students and faculty, what can they be doing? I think, you can, obviously you can go online, you can learn about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the calls to action. I'm doing the course at the University of Alberta now, that online course. There are ways, online to learn. Are there opportunities at the university for non-Indigenous students to learn from other Indigenous students? I think, and I had said to Catharyn, for me as someone who's not Indigenous, the most significant learning that I've had has been through conversation, through listening, through experience, sharing food, taking time together. And, is that something that we're going to see at the university, or, is any of that going on now?
So some of the programming that we have, or some of the conversations we do have, and right now our programming is online, of course, because of the pandemic.
The COVID and
yeah. So we are inclusive and welcoming, and like I said earlier, that the space is prioritized for Indigenous students. However, there are opportunities for learning between Indigenous and non-Indigenous and peoples, and it's important that spaces are created not just at Juniper House but right across the university. So I think these conversations are happening, and it's important to make space and places where conversations can happen between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples.
So for Indigenous students who are considering applying to programs at Memorial University, what's available to them? How do they reach out? What steps can they take?
So once a student self-identifies on the application process to attend Memorial, or once they're enrolled, I can then reach out to them by email to say, we are here and this is what we do. And so, and check out our Facebook page, because we put a lot of our activities and updates on Facebook. Once they reach out, we let them know what activities we have. For example, First Nations and Inuit drumming every alternating Friday afternoon. We have the occasional craft sessions where we create, things could be out of sealskin, could be a number of beading, and we'll find a facilitator, usually an Indigenous facilitator who can guide that process as well. And also we refer students to the correct, in terms of academics, we refer students to the correct units on campus, such as academic advising.
So making those connections, to the mainstream services at the university as well.
Yes, that navigation piece can be very difficult for many students. So, that's important.
So for our last couple of minutes, let's talk about setting up Indigenous students for academic success. You know, I think there's tutoring programs and other services that are available for Indigenous students.
Yes, the ISRC has a Indigenous Student Success Coordinator. Indigenous students reach out to the Student Success Coordinator if they have questions about need help, need tutoring in a particular subject area. So the Success Coordinator matches or pairs students with tutors who are paid, and Indigenous students can avail of those services. We also have writing sessions twice a week. So that just helps students write papers at the university level and to help them succeed there. Yes.
And I suppose, you know, there's also opportunities for some students to practice and use their traditional language. Is that the case?
Well, yes, we have heard. I'm just thinking of one instance where we have some Nunatsiavut students speaking with a Greenlander, so and trying to compare some words there, but very different dialects, of course. But you get those conversations for sure within the Student Resource Center.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today, Valerie. And certainly, you know, we hope that Indigenous students across the province will avail of the services at the Indigenous Student Resource Center.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate being here.
You're welcome. We'll be back after these messages.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
I wish I had an hour for tonight's show. I hope you enjoyed our conversations with Catharyn Andersen and Valeri Pilgrim. Join us next time on Out of the Fog.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send